I want to tell you a story about Erub, an island in the eastern Torres Strait. Erub is central to who I am. It is where my mother was born and where she married my father in 1958. In 2018, 60 years after my parents married, I began working with the University of Sydney collection of animal, plant, and cultural objects for a planned exhibition. Collected in 1875, the bulk of the material was taken from Erub. The collection also included the skulls of 12 memorialized ancestors and the body of a mummified man. Over the last 20 or so years, the University of Sydney has actively sought, but not succeeded in returning these ancestors to Erub. I wrestled with how to work with the material, knowing that everything, the fish, shells, birds, and ancestors, were taken together over a period of about 2 weeks. I was especially anxious about whether to acknowledge the ancestors in a public forum. This sat inside me like stone. For a while, doing nothing with this material seemed like a possible, if cowardly, answer. Then something happened that changed my approach. A conversation with an uncle in mid-2018 led to some questions I couldn't evade. Unprompted, he asked me about the old man, the mummified ancestor, and who cared for him in the museum. What has happened to him, he asked. And more generally, why did they want our old people? So in early 2019, I visited Erub and I talked about the old man and other ancestors with elders and community members. Our conversations then and since have added new questions, as well as other ways for thinking about the taken ancestors. And in the last couple of years, I started writing a biography of the old man so that Erubamle, that is the people of Erub, can know what happened to him while he was kept in Sydney. Perhaps you are now wondering how this is relevant to the topic of progress. So let me give you another way to enter this story. Progress is a loaded term for Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders. For 236 years, it drove and vindicated the British occupation of our homelands and the subsequent destruction of the environment and lifeways considered by Europeans to be primitive and savage. Progress sat firmly in the advancement of a racialized hierarchy that fused ideas of race with science to rank the world's human population through the supposed scientific comparison of skeletal remains. From the 18th and into the 20th century, the ancestors of Indigenous peoples, the enslaved, the criminal and the insane were targeted by collectors internationally. The trade in bones was brisk. Scientific institutions such as universities and medical schools across the UK, Europe and North America competed with each other and became enthusiastic recipients of ancestral remains. News stories and institutional records capture both the brutality and the banality of how ancestors became medical specimens or resources for comparative anatomy. Some say the removal of the ancestral remains of Indigenous people occurred in Australia for more than 200 years. The skeletal remains of people of colour were especially sought, though, as European men of science believed they could verify white body supremacy by demonstrating scientifically that black skin inferiority would be detected in our bones. Along with anatomy departments, museums became storage sites for thousands of ancestors. And while the role that museums played was quite different to anatomy labs, the work of anatomists was bolstered through the public space of museums. The black and brown-skinned ancestors who ended up there became part of the instruments of racism. By what they chose and how they exhibited their collections, museums erroneously used our collected ancestors to make race appear real. And it could be argued to promote racism. Each assisted the other in making supposed fact. And while this might appear to be a story of past practices, its effect is still felt today, both here and around the world. As recently as 2019, a Nigerian student at an Ivy League American university asked his teacher why a human skull was on display in his classroom, and why the words "Negro born in Africa" was written on the label pasted on the skull's forehead. This example is a powerful learning moment. As a basic response, direct engagement with this history can help transform a museum or anatomy department into places of openness and respectful dialogue. But my decision to research and write the biography of the old man speaks to the need to resolve or progress his situation. I am searching for processes that might allow for his informed and respectful return to Erub. But a new stone sits beside me now. What if his taking in 1875 disrupted his journey to being memorialized? In trying to understand what it might mean to memorialize ancestors, I began looking for our stories about their care and veneration. The one I want to share was recorded on Badu Island in 1967 and published in 1970. As with many stories about practices before the shift from the oral to the written, there is no surefire way of dating the period it portrays. The story is about a man named Sesere and how he learnt about a strange new animal. One morning at low tide, Sesere was walking about on the reef, spearing fish, something he did every day. On this day, he notices that the seagrass is different. The meadow had been eaten in a way he had not seen before. Some days later, he sees a type of dung that was also unusual. Puzzling about these things, he wondered what kind of animal is visiting the reef and whether it might be good to eat. He would have to catch it to find out, he thinks. To find out how to catch it, he would get advice from his parents. But his parents had died a long time ago, so Sesere went to their resting place. And caves were a usual keeping place for ancestors' remains, and most often it was skulls that were consulted. After removing the skulls of his parents, Sesere washed and then rubbed them with the scented leaves of 2 plants. Then he spoke to them. "Ama, Baba, both of you," he said, "give me a dream tonight. Strange animals are on the reef. What are they? How should I catch them?" That night, he slept with his head close to his parents. As he slept, he heard the sound of fingernail flicking, and soon after, they appeared to him. "Climb the hill tomorrow morning," they said. "Search until you find a place of many small birds, and there you will find all you need to catch the dugong. That is the animal feeding on the reef." Sesere does as he's told and becomes a successful dugong hunter. Of course, there is more to this story. My intent in sharing what I have is to make a point about how significant the relationship was between living and departed islanders. By October 2025, the taken ancestors will have spent 150 years in Sydney. That the people of Erub are entitled to ask questions and learn about what happened to them is undeniable. I hope that my giving story to the old man can contribute something useful to their processes for deciding on his final resting place. Progress then tells me our ancestors can't stay in museums. Their return to their homelands and descendants is a material way for institutions to demonstrate they acknowledge that times have changed. Those old ideas about race have, if you like, progressed. The ideas that existed when our ancestors were collected in the 19th century no longer hold. Their return is the progress I would like to see and to write about.